Snow pressed down on the mountains like a suffocating blanket, each flake swallowed into the silence of Vanar IV's endless storm. The wind hissed through jagged rocks and carved deep furrows in the drifts, a landscape both cruel and indifferent. To the Galactic Union, it was a frozen wasteland worth little more than its mineral veins. To Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes, United States Marine Corps, it was simply the next battlefield. Different weather, same truths. Cold or heat, desert or tundra, men and machines bled all the same. The Union soldiers were not men, not by Earth's reckoning. Some towered on digitigrade limbs. Others hunched behind scaled carapaces or flickering energy shields. Their war gear glowed with plasma cores and antimatter cells, their armor shimmering with fields designed to repel beams hotter than a star's surface. They called themselves veterans of galactic campaigns spanning centuries. They called humanity, the latecomers, primitives with backward weapons. When Hayes first arrived, rifle slung across his back and snow-white ghillie cloak dragging in the wind, he heard their laughter. To them, the weapon he carried was a relic, a museum piece of iron and gunpowder. They could not fathom why command had dragged one human into their ranks. Yet the Union needed him. The Threx, brutal enemies who relished attrition and conquest, had pressed hard into this system. On Vanar IV, their advance had slowed, not because of Union courage, but because the storm broke technology. Drones dropped dead from the sky, sensors clogged with static, plasma coils frozen in their housings. The aliens who mocked Earth's weapons discovered their energy rifles were fickle in the cold. Batteries froze, reactors sputtered. Even their heavy armor seized up, hydraulics straining in sub-zero air. Hayes's rifle, by contrast, required nothing but powder, steel, and the will to fire it. The mountain favored simplicity. Hayes was not a man of speeches. His fellow Marines had nicknamed him Hawk for the way his eyes never stopped scanning, the way he could hold still for hours, waiting, until his quarry exposed itself. He had hunted insurgents through desert wadis and warlords through dense forests, his scope always finding the one thread that unraveled a battle. The Union soldiers around him knew none of this. They only saw a quiet man with a weapon they did not respect. Hayes didn't bother to explain himself. His creed had always been that the first shot said more than any words. The Threx patrols appeared at dawn, hulking figures trudging through the gale. Their exoskeletons gleamed faintly, marked with the scars of countless wars. They carried plasma spears that hissed with restrained energy, their shields glowing in faint ripples around them. From a distance, they looked invincible, creatures born of metal and fury. Hayes pressed his body deeper into the snowbank, adjusting his rifle's bipod. Through the scope, the storm dissolved. Each detail sharpened, the commander's stride, the nervous twitch of a soldier's helmet, the faint seams where plates met. He slowed his breathing until it matched the storm's rhythm. A Union officer beside him scoffed, muttering something about wasted effort. Hayes ignored it. His world had narrowed to the glass and the target inside it. He centered the crosshairs on the commander's visor. For a heartbeat, nothing existed but the target and the trigger beneath his finger. He squeezed. The crack of the rifle shattered the silence, a brutal sound against the storm's whisper. A breath later, the Threx commander's visor burst open, shards spraying crimson across the snow. The towering figure staggered, then crumpled into the drift. The alien formation froze, disbelief rippling through their ranks. Hayes racked the bolt, the spent casing tumbling into the snow. No celebration, no flourish, just the rhythm of his work. The second shot came as another officer raised its weapon, trying to rally the formation. Hayes corrected for drift, adjusted for distance, and fired. Another crack, another fall. The Union soldiers around him went quiet. They had expected spectacle, perhaps a futile gesture. Instead, they saw death delivered with surgical precision. Their laughter died in the snow with the aliens. The Threx reacted with fury. Shields flared, soldiers scattered into staggered lines, weapons sweeping the ridges. Plasma bolts screamed into the mountainside, carving gashes of steam and fire. Hayes was already moving, crawling backward along his prepared path, snow collapsing over his shoulders as he slipped into a fresh position. The blizzard covered his tracks. When the Threx fired, they struck nothing but empty drifts. When Hayes fired again, another body dropped, the rifle's crack echoing like thunder. Union soldiers began whispering among themselves, all bleeding into their voices. They had dismissed him as primitive. Now they struggled to reconcile what they saw. Shields designed to withstand the fury of stars defeated by silent metal slugs. To them, Hayes was no longer a soldier. He was something else, something dangerous. Hayes didn't notice. He only adjusted his scope, chambered another round, and continued the rhythm. The Threx broke formation at last, dragging their wounded back toward their trenches. They had not retreated, not truly, but they had faltered. The arrogance with which they marched had cracked. Hayes watched them go, his fingers still resting lightly on the trigger, ready for any last act of defiance. None came. The valley fell into uneasy quiet. Hayes lowered the rifle just slightly, muscles stiff from hours of stillness. Snow clung to his cloak, to his mask, to the barrel of his weapon. He looked no different than the drift he hid in, a piece of the mountain given purpose. The Kareth officer at his side finally spoke, voice hushed. They mock you, human, yet they fear you now. Hayes didn't answer. He brushed snow from the bolt and reloaded, sliding a fresh round into the chamber. The storm had not ended. The threats would return, stronger, angrier, unwilling to let one human sniper dictate the battle. Hayes knew the truth of it. This was only the opening shot. Still, that first exchange had shifted something in the valley. The Union soldiers no longer laughed at his rifle. The Threx no longer marched without caution. The mountain had accepted him, wrapped him in its silence, and given him dominion over its ridges. Hayes settled into his cloak once more, returning to the scope. Somewhere in the distance, shadows moved. He breathed, calm and patient, knowing the fight had only just begun. The storm deepened through the night, carving ridges of snow into sharp white blades along the mountain slopes. The Kareth detachment huddled in a hollowed ridge, muttering in their guttural tongue as they struggled to coax life into their sputtering plasma rifles. Hayes ignored them. His focus remained outward, his body pressed against the snow, his scope sweeping the ridge lines. Every few minutes he adjusted his position by inches, never staying still long enough to be predictable. The silence between shots was as important as the shots themselves. Silence created fear. Silence let the enemy's imagination do his work for him. Far below, the Threx regrouped. They had dragged the bodies of their fallen commander and lieutenant back into their lines, their exoskeletons groaning under the weight. They did not retreat. That was not in their nature. Hayes watched them with careful eyes. Their discipline impressed him, quick to reorganize, quick to spread into staggered lines, their heavy steps crunching through the snow with mechanical precision. But discipline could not erase the hesitation that had crept into their movements. They no longer strode with arrogance. Every helmet turned toward the mountainside. Every formation slowed, as if the storm itself were hiding a predator. Hayes could see it. They were afraid of a single rifle shot. The Kareth officer beside him shifted uneasily, his scaled hands clenching his weapon. They will adapt, he muttered, his accent thick. The Threx are not fools. They will flush you out, human. Hayes didn't answer. Words meant little. His reply came as a trigger squeeze. The crack split the air, echoing across the valley. Another Threx stumbled, its leg joint pierced by a round that slipped past its armor plates. The alien fell hard into the snow, thrashing. Hayes chambered another round, watching as the formation dissolved into a panicked scramble. They did not know where the shot came from. Their scanners still showed nothing. Hayes breathed evenly, adjusted, and dropped another target with a single precise strike. The Kareth officer stared through the blizzard with widened eyes. You see through the storm as if it were nothing, he said quietly, as though afraid to break Hayes's concentration. You kill with iron rods, and yet they fall. They fall because they think technology makes them invincible. Hayes murmured, not looking away from the scope. His voice was calm, steady, as if he were reciting a fact rather than making a boast. It doesn't. It just makes them predictable. The Union soldiers grew silent after that, watching him work. Each shot carved through the arrogance that had hung over them since the campaign began. These warriors had laughed at him when he arrived with his bolt-action rifle, calling it ancient. Now, they gripped their weapons tighter, their respect growing with each report of his rifle. In their eyes, Hayes could see their understanding shifting. Perhaps technology was only as strong as the one who wielded it. The Threx adjusted tactics by late morning. Hayes spotted them spreading further apart, moving in zigzag patterns to complicate his firing solutions. They dragged portable shields into position, attempting to create moving walls of plasma that might absorb his bullets. Hayes studied them through the glass, analyzing angles, timing their steps. Shields overlapped awkwardly in the snow, leaving seams. The Threx didn't realize that in trying to cover every side, they had created new weaknesses. Hayes breathed, squeezed, and sent a round directly through the narrow seam where two shields failed to meet. Another soldier fell, collapsing backward against his comrades. Panic rippled again. This time, the Threx retaliated with fury. Bolts of plasma cut into the mountainside, hissing against the snow, carving trenches of steam and fire. The Union soldiers ducked, their armor sizzling where stray shots struck too close. Hayes slid backward, moving along his carefully prepared crawl path. He never fired twice from the same place. By the time the Threx narrowed in on one ridge, Hayes was already 100 meters away, prone behind a fresh snowbank. He reloaded smoothly, each motion practiced until it was part of his muscle memory. His patience was a weapon. While the Threx wasted energy and ammunition in blind rage, Hayes conserved his. He let minutes pass without firing, letting the cold gnaw at their nerves. The storm masked his movement. The snow disguised his heat signature. When the enemy began to relax, convinced he had retreated, Hayes fired again, cutting down another officer. The cycle repeated. Fear, anger, confusion, silence, then the thunder of his rifle. The Kareth detachment began whispering among themselves. Some called him the Phantom. Others said the mountain itself had given birth to a hunter. Hayes ignored their superstitions. He wasn't a phantom. He was a man doing what he had been trained to do. But he understood their awe. To them, war was noise and light, weapons glowing with furious energy. To see war distilled into a single crack of thunder and a body falling lifeless in the snow. That was something they could not reconcile with their understanding of the galaxy. As midday approached, Hayes studied the Threx line through a scope. They had stopped advancing. Instead, they dug shallow trenches and tried to fortify their position, their plasma blades cutting into the frozen ground. They feared pushing further into the mountains. Hayes allowed himself a rare, fleeting thought of satisfaction. They had been halted not by an army, not by drones or orbital strikes, but by one man and his rifle. The satisfaction vanished as quickly as it came. Hayes knew they would not stop for long. The Threx commander who replaced the fallen officer would soon find another strategy. Perhaps they would attempt flanking maneuvers, or perhaps they would wait for reinforcements. Hayes adjusted his scope again, noting the changing light as the storm thinned. Shadows stretched longer across the valley. Soon, night would fall. Night was both ally and enemy. It would cover his movements, but it would also allow the Threx to move unseen. Beside him, the Kareth officer finally spoke again. Perhaps the others were wrong about humans. Perhaps your way of war has value after all. His tone was grudging, as if the words were difficult to form. Hayes kept his eye on the scope. It's not about my way of war. It's about understanding the land, the weather, the enemy. Technology makes soldiers lazy. It teaches them to rely on machines instead of themselves. Out here, that gets you killed. The officer did not respond, but Hayes could feel the weight of his gaze. Respect had replaced disdain. That was enough. Far below, Hayes caught a flicker of movement, shadows breaking from the main line, moving along the right flank. Smaller squad, faster, lighter armor. Scouts, perhaps, sent to flush him out. Hayes's lips tightened behind his mask. The threats were learning. They wanted to bait him into revealing his position. He would have to be careful. The storm quieted to a soft whisper as night settled in, the air sharp and brittle with cold. Hayes pulled his rifle closer, his gloved hands steady. The threats thought they were the hunters now. That was their mistake. He adjusted his scope, tracking the movement of the flanking squad. His breath slowed, his vision tunneled to the glass, and he prepared to remind them once again that the mountains belonged not to technology, but to patience and steel. The flanking squad moved with calculated precision, their figures faint shadows against the deepening snow. Hayes studied them through the scope, noting the subtle differences from the bulkier soldiers in the main formation. These threats carried lighter armor, their exoskeletons streamlined for speed, and their weapons were smaller, designed for close quarters rather than long-range bombardment. Scouts, yes, but also hunters. They moved in a staggered line, each one crouched low, their helmets sweeping the ridges with sensors that glowed faintly blue in the dusk. Hayes could almost feel their confidence returning. They thought they had adapted. He remained still, his rifle resting on its bipod, his breath slow and even. Firing too soon would reveal his position, and the scouts were spread widely enough that killing one would alert the rest. Hayes had spent years practicing the art of waiting. He remembered nights in Afghanistan, lying motionless for 10 hours in the desert while his target moved only once. Patience had always been his greatest weapon. Now it was being tested by alien hunters who thought they could outweight him. The Kareth detachment stirred nervously behind him. Their officer whispered a warning, claws scraping against the ice as he gestured toward the approaching figures. Hayes didn't turn. He didn't need to. He knew exactly where each scout was, could trace their paths in his mind as those sketching lines on a map. One wrong move, one careless step, and they would close in on him. Yet Hayes felt no fear. His heartbeat remained steady. He had been hunted before. The trick was to remember that hunters could become prey. The first scout reached a ridge less than 300 meters away, crouched behind a jagged rock spire. Its helmet turned slowly, the faint glow of its visor sweeping across the snow. Hayes resisted the urge to fire. The angle was wrong, the shot imperfect. He would wait until the others exposed themselves. The second scout slid into cover 50 meters to the left, its weapon raised. The third and fourth fanned out, circling wide, attempting to box him in. Hayes adjusted the scope, watching them carefully. They were disciplined. He would give them that. But discipline didn't make them invisible. Every time they moved, snow shifted, crunching faintly beneath their armored boots. Their exhalations steamed into the frigid air. To the naked eye, perhaps they blended with the storm. Through Hayes's glass, they were clear as ink stains on paper. He tracked their rhythm, anticipating when they would peak, when they would shift positions, when they would grow bold enough to rush. Minutes dragged into an hour. The Kareth muttered among themselves, too restless to appreciate the stillness. Hayes ignored them, every nerve attuned to the scout's movements. Finally, one made a mistake. The third scout broke cover too soon, exposing a gap as it sprinted toward a snowbank. Hayes's finger tightened. The rifle cracked, a thunderclap in the night. The round punched through the scout's visor, sending it crashing into the snow. The others froze. That hesitation was all Hayes needed. He racked the bolt, chambered a new round, shifted his aim. The second scout tried to dive behind cover, but Hayes was faster. Another shot, another body crumpled. The survivors retaliated instantly, plasma bolts searing the snow where he had been. Hayes slid backward down his crawl path, snow spilling over his shoulders as he moved to a new nest. He knew they would converge on the shot's origin. By the time they arrived, he would already have another angle. The scouts pressed hard, firing wildly into the drifts. The snow glowed faintly from the heat of their blasts, steam curling into the frigid air. Hayes exhaled, calm amidst the chaos. He lined up the third survivor, waiting for it to pause and check its sensor. When it did, Hayes fired, the bullet striking true. The last scout panicked, retreating toward the main line. Hayes considered letting it go, but discipline won out. He squeezed again. Silence followed. The valley was quiet once more, broken only by the whisper of the wind. Hayes reloaded, scanning for further movement. None came. The Threx line remained hunkered in their trenches, unwilling to advance after losing yet another squad. Hayes lowered his rifle slightly, flexing the stiffness from his hands. His breathing steadied, but his thoughts churned. The Threx had tested him with scouts, and he had answered. Next, they would escalate. They always did. The KRF officer approached cautiously, his scaled features half hidden in the storm. You move like a shadow, he said, voice low. The Threx are skilled hunters, yet you unmake them as if they were prey. How? Hayes glanced at him briefly before returning to the scope. Because they hunt with confidence. I hunt with caution. Confidence gets you killed. The alien studied him for a long moment, then inclined his head slightly, an acknowledgement of respect. The shift in tone was subtle but undeniable. No longer was Hayes merely a primitive curiosity. He had become something else in their eyes, a weapon as terrifying as any plasma cannon, but one they could not replicate. As night deepened, the Threx attempted their next strategy. Hayes spotted the movement first. Heavy figures advancing with mechanical precision, their outlines bulkier than before. Exo-armor, reinforced and shielded, trudging across the snow like walking fortresses. Each step shook the ground faintly, a rhythmic thud that carried even through the storm. The KRF muttered anxiously, recognizing the escalation. Hayes adjusted his scope, studying the armored forms. The armor would not fall easily to conventional rounds, but nothing was invulnerable. Every machine had seams, joints, weak points. He just needed time to find them. He tracked the lead exo-soldier, watching how the armor shifted as it moved. Hydraulic pistons flexed at the knees and elbows. Vents released brief bursts of steam to prevent overheating, and the visor glowed bright with augmented sensors. Hayes's eyes narrowed. The vents. Brief openings, small but consistent. He calculated the timing, the trajectory, the split-second window. His breath slowed, every sense narrowing to the circle of glass. The rifle cracked. The round lanced through the storm, striking the vent as it opened. The exo-soldier shuddered, steam erupting violently before the machine collapsed into the snow, crippled. The others faltered, surprised by the sudden loss. Hayes chambered another round and repeated the process, each shot precise, each target falling in turn. What had been meant as unstoppable juggernauts became little more than iron coffins littering the snow. The KRF stared in disbelief, their awe palpable. Hayes ignored them, his focus absolute. He knew the Threx would not stop. They would keep sending more, changing tactics, escalating until either they broke him or he broke them. That was the nature of war. But he also knew something else. Every time they adapted, every time they tried a new strategy, they revealed more of themselves. And Hayes would be waiting, patient as the mountain, until the moment came to end it. As the wreckage of the exo-soldiers smoked in the snow and the storm howled over the valley, Hayes settled deeper into his nest. The night was far from over, and the Threx were not yet finished. But neither was he. The valley smelled of ozone and scorched metal, the wrecks of shattered exo-suits still venting steam into the frigid air. Hayes lay flat against the snow, his cheek pressed to the stock of his rifle, his eye unblinking as it peered through the scope. The Threx had fallen silent for the first time since the battle began. They were calculating, planning their next strike. Hayes could feel it in the way the storm seemed to pause, the way the shadows in the trenches shifted as alien officers conferred. He knew their kind well enough now. They would not allow a human with a bolt-action rifle to humiliate them forever. They would throw everything they had left. The KRF detachment crouched close behind him, no longer restless, no longer mocking. Their eyes were fixed on the valley below, their claws gripping weapons they no longer trusted. One of them whispered a prayer in his guttural tone. Another adjusted his armor nervously, as though seeking comfort in its weight. Hayes ignored them. His world had narrowed to the ridgeline and the enemy beyond it. Everything else was distraction. The first sign of the final push came as a deep vibration through the snow. Hayes felt it before he saw it, the tremor passing into his bones. Moments later, Massive shapes loomed from the storm. Armored walkers, each one towering over the battlefield, their legs stabbing into the drifts with mechanical precision. Plasma cannons bristled from their frames, glowing faintly with restrained fury. Hayes's jaw tightened. This was it, the Threx committing their war machines to crush what one man had accomplished. The walkers advanced in a line, flanked by fresh infantry squads. The ground shook with their march. Snow slid from the mountainside in loose avalanches, stirred by the thunder of their steps. The Union soldiers huddled tighter, fear etched into every movement. Hayes shifted the scope, studying the machines. Their armor was thick, their shielding stronger than anything he had faced so far. A direct shot to the body would do nothing. He searched for weaknesses. Joints, fuel cells, sensors. Every machine had them. He just needed the patience to find them. The first target revealed itself as a walker paused to adjust its stride. A joint locked for a fraction of a second, a narrow seam in the armor exposed. Hayes's breathing slowed, his finger brushing the trigger. He squeezed. The rifle cracked, the round cutting through the seam. The walker staggered, its stride faltering, one leg collapsing into the snow. A ripple of disbelief swept through the alien lines. Hayes had just proven the machines were vulnerable. The Threx responded with fury. Plasma cannons roared, lancing into the mountainside, melting snow into rivers that hissed and froze again in seconds. The ground shook as explosions tore into the ridges. Hayes slid backward, moving along his crawl path, snow cascading over his body as he vanished into another nest. The bombardment was deafening, the air thick with steam and fire. Yet Hayes remained calm. He had seen worse in deserts and cities, where mortars fell without warning. Survival meant movement, timing, and trust in his craft. When the firestorm paused, Hayes returned to his scope. Another walker moved forward, its armor plates shifting with each step. He tracked it, waited for the vents to release steam, and fired. The round punched through, igniting a chain reaction that erupted in sparks and flame. The machine toppled, its massive body crashing into the snow with a thunderous groan. Panic spread among the infantry. They fired blindly into the storm, their discipline unraveling. Hayes worked methodically, his focus absolute. Every shot counted, every target chosen with care. He moved between nests, never staying long enough to be caught. The walkers fell one by one, their hulking bodies marking the valley with burning wreckage. The Threx infantry broke ranks, retreating toward their trenches, their confidence shattered. For all their advanced weapons, for all their arrogance, they could not withstand the relentless precision of a man and his rifle. The Kareth officer beside him finally spoke, his voice hushed with awe. "You have broken them. One man, and they scatter." Hayes didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the scope, tracking the last survivors as they fled into the blizzard. He squeezed again, the shot echoing like a final verdict. The last officer fell, its body sprawled across the snow. Silence followed, deep and absolute, broken only by the wind's mournful howl. The battle was over. For a long moment, Hayes did not move. He kept his cheek against the stock, his breathing steady, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. Only when he was certain the valley was empty did he lower the rifle. His muscles ached from hours of stillness, but his mind remained sharp. He had no celebration in him, no triumph. This was the work. This was what he did. The Kareth gathered around him, their expressions unreadable but their posture reverent. They looked at him not as a primitive, not as a curiosity, but as something altogether different, something dangerous, something necessary. One of them muttered a phrase in their language, a word that seemed to carry weight. The officer translated quietly. "They will tell stories of you. The phantom in the snow, the scope that sees through storms." Hayes shook his head. Stories don't matter. What matters is that they remember we're not to be underestimated. His voice was flat, but beneath it was a steel edge that silenced further words. As the storm began to ease, the valley revealed its scars. Shattered walkers smoldered in the drifts. Alien bodies lay still, scattered across the white. The mountain was quiet again, its silence returning as though it had never been broken. Hayes stood slowly, slinging the rifle across his back. His legs were stiff, his breath visible in the icy air. He glanced once more through the scope, scanning the horizon. Nothing moved. For now, he knew the Threx would remember this battle. He knew word would spread through the Union, through the galaxy itself. They would whisper about the human marksman who turned snow into a killing ground, who made advanced armies tremble with nothing but patience and steel. They would question their own arrogance, wonder what other primitives might be capable of. That was enough. Hayes adjusted his mask, turned toward the Kareth, and began walking down the ridge. His boots crunched against the snow, steady and deliberate. He did not look back at the valley. He had no need to. The message had been delivered, carved into the battlefield with every shot. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was not obsolete. Humanity endured. And somewhere in the vast expanse of stars, others would soon learn the same lesson.